Hello, good evening. It's nice to be here with each and every one of you. Can all of you hear me just fine? Yes, good, good. And so I want to just offer a big thank you to everyone for your donations and your support. And a thank you for those of you who struggled a little bit with the technology last week. I think we had a glitch in the matrix and it wasn't, all the dots weren't connecting. I think the problem was on our end. So I think we have it fixed. And so hopefully we're in a good state again. And so, yeah, let's just take a moment and invite everyone to arrive here. And of course, if you have a question, those of you joining on Zoom, you're welcome to raise your hand. You're also welcome to put it in the chat. And then those of you on Facebook, you're welcome to leave a question in the comments section. Now, I do have a lot of questions this evening. I'll do my best to get through all of them. But one of the things that I'd like to start this evening with is just a gentle apology from my heart to yours. I mean, so many of you have been emailing me and contacting me, and I've just been really busy and meeting with everyone who I meet with and teaching and taking care of my girls, and I just can't keep up. So if I've lost track of your email or you need to reschedule a session or something, feel free just to email me again and remind me and say, hey Craig, I have this question, or something got dropped between the cracks. So one of the things I would like to speak about tonight is it's just this very topic of failure. For so many of us, life is really hard. Sometimes it's just hard consistently. Sometimes we're doing really good. And then all of a sudden we get slapped in the face with one thing we can't control, or maybe it's even 3 or 4 or 5 things we can't control. And recently, it seems like life on planet Earth has been like that, where it's just been one thing after the next, just slapping us in the face or pulling the carpet out from under us. And there's this great myth, like a spiritual myth, that if we are one day enlightened, life will be easy. It will be not difficult. Or if one day we are enlightened, difficulty won't come our way, or if it does, we will have such clarity of mind, and that action will just follow our heart, and everything will work out perfectly. And this week, I can say with myself personally, I experienced some really confusing circumstances from within my family, from within students. And there was times when I looked at God and basically I said, I do not understand your intelligence, your wisdom here. And I can say this, I hope this is a humble thing, but most of my life, 95% of the time, I can see clearly or make, a fair assumption that God's intelligence is at play here. You're getting a little fender bender. Okay, God's intelligence is at play, maybe teaching me to slow down. A flight gets canceled. Okay, maybe I wasn't meant to go. When you see the world erupting a little bit, to me it makes sense. I was, speaking with a yoga teacher here in town, and she was telling me that her husband is like a prepper, like a doomsday prepper. And I said, oh yeah, like I'm right there with him. Like I was fully waiting for this moment in history for the world just to kind of explode. And it makes perfect sense to me. You know, with climate change and um, racial inequality, police brutality, just the division in our country between, people not speaking anymore. It seems like we're just throwing rocks at each other. And so, yeah, all of that, makes sense. But occasionally, God will throw me a curveball where someone I love is just given a really difficult set of cards. And I look at it and I can't make any sense of it. This great question of, well, why do bad things happen to good people? And my go-to teaching is, well, we live in an evolutionary world, so there's all, layers and levels of evolution, intermixed, so there's the highest levels of Buddhas, and there's people who are, in their last incarnation, maybe they were a pit bull. And so, but this week, there was a couple times when I couldn't even calm myself, with this realization. We're seeing that just evolutionary worldview. There was a couple times when I looked up at God and said, I just don't understand you. I don't understand this. Because I felt the pain of it, the ache. And of course, there was something personal there when it involves your children or family or good friends. It's hard to see the vast view, and it's hard not to suffer to some degree. This is one of the reasons I love the teachings of Jesus so much, because we see that Christ is this incredible enlightened master, the Son of God. He suffered immensely. And that story at the end of the cross, Jesus on the cross, just Jesus being persecuted in general, it really makes this point, this teaching, explicit. It's just really clear that there's some things we just don't understand. Some things we'll never figure out. Some things that just don't make sense to our humanity. And so then the question is, well, what do we do? Well, of course, it's the same teaching as before. We do our best to listen to our heart. We do our best to respond with wisdom. And we do our best, if we fail, to fail well. To fall on our face. And I mean, sometimes that's the whole teaching, is God puts us up in a double bind where we're just, one way or the other. We're not going to win. We're going to lose. And sometimes that's the path, is just to fail. And boy, is this a tough teaching. Is just sometimes we're supposed to fall on our knees, fall on our face. Sometimes we are literally supposed to do the wrong thing. Because in a year or two, we'll learn about forgiveness, or we'll learn about surrender, or we'll learn about breathing deeply in the very pit of hell. And so I just wanted to share this teaching tonight because I know many people have this illusion that one day I will get to a place where suffering doesn't happen. And a lot of great teachers, say that that's possible. And, I don't really agree. I can say someday we get to a place where there's much less suffering. But if you have a partner, if you have children, if there's anyone in your life and you care about, it's okay to admit that there's some things in this world that don't make sense. It's okay to say, if I were God, I would design the world a little bit differently. I'd make it a little easier, a little sweeter. And then just come back to the teaching of acceptance, which is we don't get to design the world. We're not in charge of that one. And so even just admitting that out loud, sometimes giving yourself permission to throw up your hands at God and say, I don't understand you. When we begin this conversation with God, there's an opening to acceptance, an opening to surrender, an opening to just falling on our knees and grieving. Because sometimes that's the answer when we're in a double bind or triple bind or quadruple bind. We have to learn about how to surrender, how to grieve, how to fall apart and rise again like the phoenix. Like the phoenix. And so I'll hop into the questions here. Then, of course, again, if you have a question, you're welcome to put it in the chat. But here's a question I have from Tomer. Tomer, I hope I'm saying your name properly. I met Tomer a couple of years ago at the Science and Non-Duality Conference. And basically, he wrote me a question about Sri Aurobindo. And it was a long question, but I'll see if I can make it short. Basically, he writes, "Hi, Craig. My impression of him," that's Aurobindo, "is that he is one of the most well-rounded teachers to ever live, and his teachings, in a way, are light years ahead of even the most modern teachings. Why do you think almost no one mentions him? Even Adya always mentions Ramana Maharshi, who I dearly love, but never mentions Aurobindo, although I think Adya's teachings, in a way, are closer to Aurobindo's. Whether it's the embodiment of truth on earth, mind and heart, gut, the different levels of awakening. Is it just because he is such a hard read, or do they think he is more of a philosopher than an actual awakened being? What do you think? Is he more a genius philosopher, or do you think he is an extraordinary awakened being? Thank you." What a beautiful question. I think sometimes when a teacher comes to earth and they literally are light years ahead of everyone else on the planet, they're misunderstood. People don't value them. People don't honor them. A lot of times it's just purely that people don't understand what the person is saying. It's like sometimes my little girl asks me questions. And I start to explain, she'll ask me like, "Dad, why is the sky blue?" And so I started explaining to her about the light reflecting off the ocean and bouncing off the atmosphere. And she's 6, and it just went right over her head. She's like, "What are you saying, Dad?" So finally I said, "Because God painted it blue." And then she just smiled and said, "Oh, it's so beautiful." So beautiful. So that made sense to her. And, of course, I'm not going to speak for Adya, but, why he doesn't mention Aurobindo very much. But, Aurobindo was an incredible light. He was both a genius philosopher and an awakened master. And I'll dare to say this, possibly the most amazing master who's ever walked the planet. And, every great master shows up and they offer some new level of divinity, some level of radiance. And so to compare things is not a fair comparison. But one of the things that Aurobindo brought forward that was different than the past was that most everyone in the past looked at the spiritual path as an individual thing. They wanted to wake up for their own sanity, their own freedom, their own experience. That the spiritual path was always an individual endeavor. The Buddha, he wanted to know the end of suffering, but it was him personally. He wanted to know the end of suffering. And almost every great saint or sage has a story how they were plagued by wanting to know the truth, wanting to wake up, to free themselves, from hell. The thing that Aurobindo did differently that was so revolutionary is what he invited was an awakening of the consciousness of the species, that's all humankind, and the planet itself, matter itself. And if you ever dive deep into his work, oftentimes right away you're just blown away because it almost sounds like some new age, science fiction thing that's mixed in with like evolutionary biology and science. And he was trained at Oxford. He's just one of the most brilliant minds that possibly ever walked the planet. Ken Wilber took many of his great ideas and just republished them in a different way. And, most people think of Ken Wilber as being, probably one of the brightest minds who's ever lived. And Wilber was busy, being so greatly influenced by Aurobindo. But, not to go on with this, too much, but, many people have asked me, Craig, why is it that right now at this time in history, so many people are waking up? Ordinary people like you and I. And for me, I look very clearly to the work of Aurobindo. Aurobindo looked out at the country of India, and he realized for thousands of years there's been great saints and sages. And normally they create a little ashram or maybe a big ashram. And, maybe if they're lucky, one or two students awakens within that community. But what Aurobindo wanted was for all of us to wake up, that the awakening would start to give birth literally through the very fabric of our being, the DNA, the matter, the cells. And since he came, and is since gone, there's been this revolution in how many people are waking up. Now, of course, someone could argue the point, but I'm not in the mindset of arguing right now. I just bow deeply to the work he did and his teaching partner, the mother, and then Sat Prem who followed. And if anyone ever questions whether Aurobindo was an awakened master, I encourage you take a trip to Pondicherry and India. If you visit his Mahasamadhi, Mahasamadhi is where a great saint is buried. And I believe the mother is buried there with him as well. But I walked into this little courtyard in the Aurobindo ashram, and I was just, feeling normal. And I walked into the courtyard, and immediately there was such an overwhelming radiance. It's the purest light, the most brilliant light. It just blew my heart open. This was his gravesite. It's such a beautiful thing to experience that. That he died, I think, can't even remember, maybe it's 1950, maybe 1970, but it's been a long time since he's walked the earth. And his gravesite is radiating love. I happened to be there on his birthday. And they do this thing at the Aurobindo ashram on his birthday where they let you walk by the door of his room. And so I stood in line. There was probably a couple thousand people. And I thought, this is a silly thing to do. But, I was in India and thought I'd just give it a run. And when it came my turn to walk by the doorway, they just leave the door open to his room. And again, the same thing. It's a brilliant light just pouring out of his bedroom. And could you imagine this after you die? That the light of your being, the light of the very matter of your body, would radiate so much that it would infuse your bedroom with light, to infuse your gravesite with light. And so it was a wonderful experience. And so I encourage anyone, if you have any interest in studying Aurobindo, to open your heart to the teachings, open your mind, open your experience, and see what comes, see what is shown. The mistake most people make with Sri Aurobindo is they read him or the mother in an intellectual manner. And if you read any great saint, I encourage you to read with your heart. So you sit down, you open your heart, and let the truth come to you. Let the words radiate into your being, and see if there's a connection there. And so anyways, I could spend hours speaking about Aurobindo, but I'll just leave it at that because I thought it was a fun question. Here's the next question. This one's from Tom. Hi, Craig. Things I'm currently working through relate to these questions. How can we take action that is unconditional and will not create karmic consequence? Sitting in awareness is so helpful, but what is the place for action? So this kind of relates to what I was speaking about with Aurobindo. Aurobindo noticed that many people could step into the vast space of awareness where there's literally no mind. And to have no mind is a beautiful thing, as long as you don't have children, as long as you don't have a job, as long as you don't have a dog or any bills to pay. And so if we want to interact with this world, a great question is what is my heart? What is my heart? Your heart is literally a conduit of love that's completely absolute and impersonal. But your heart is also the doorway to prajna, which is wisdom in action, love in action. This wisdom that knows how to respond to life. And so if we're sitting in awareness, oftentimes we experience great freedom. But if we have zero connection in the heart, we become what many teachers would call a dumb saint or a stupid saint, where you just kind of spaced out and living in a space of freedom, but you don't know how to respond to life. If you want to know how to respond, you must have a connection to your heart. When you come into contact with your heart, you're literally coming into contact with the voice of God in you as you. Aurobindo would call this a higher mind, the supra mind, a mind that's been upgraded. So first we must step into vast spacious awareness and allow the mind to become still. And then from that place, that's just that's just the starting point. Can we from there open into a greater mind that can speak the truth to us and show us another way to live? A way that's connected to this higher intelligence. You know, what I was speaking about in the beginning, about sometimes we get in a situation where it's a double bind and we have no idea what to do. You know, great teaching my teacher David used to tell me is just to wait and see. Just wait and see. When you wait and see, basically, you're giving your human mind time just to work out all the different scenarios and think itself to death, and then exhaust itself. And then eventually, when you wait and see, if you listen in your heart, you'll hear the true voice come forward and give you an answer of how to respond. When you listen to your heart, you don't create karma. When you listen to your mind, you create karma. It's just that simple. And karma is not all bad. Sometimes karma is just, you're just repeating the collective unconsciousness. Or you're trying your best, but, it's just creating the karma of trying your best. Okay, here's the next one. Tom goes on to write, integration of the Jungian anima and femininity is something he's struggling with. I feel Kundalini expose you to feminine forces and ask for integration of these. As a result, I feel more sensitive and intuitive, but it threatens my masculine ego and makes me feel fragile and less capable of decisive action. So in theory, we want both. So we don't want to have a masculine ego or a feminine spirituality that fights with the masculine ego. We want a masculine divinity, which is basically clarity of mind, a connection to spaciousness and freedom, and an absolute trust. And also a feminine spirituality that has a big, overwhelmingly loving heart, unconditional love, sensitivity. And so the struggle here, Tom, is can you open to both? The way the dualistic mind thinks is it's either this way or that way. But can you open to both? And to see how these forces complement each other. The truth is not opposed to other truths. There's one truth. And the one truth seamlessly interacts with all truths. And so if there's fighting forces within us, that means we are not in the truth. So something needs to be seen, something needs to be surrendered. Maybe we just need to let go a little more. Maybe we need to wait and see. And so I encourage you, Tom, to have fun with this, to have fun, smile at the path. Don't make it such a struggle, but smile. Okay, so Richard has been patiently waiting. And so, Richard, let me see here. Why don't you go ahead and say hi, Richard? Can you unmute yourself, or is there... You there, Richard? Maybe maybe type it in the chat, Richard. I'm having trouble hearing you. Okay, maybe we'll come back. I can't hear you, Richard, so I don't know how to respond. But okay, let's see. Here's a question from Kyle. Craig, can you speak about spiritual people these days being subtly addicted to social media, the news, and entertainment? The spiritual texts, like the Bhagavad Gita, do not talk about some of our modern problems like these. Is there a balance to strike between using social media and being subtly addicted to it? Kyle, that's a great question. Addiction is addiction, my friend. And so whether we're addicted to something good, whether we're addicted to something unhelpful, addiction is addiction. And so the teachings of the Gita work with any addiction. But the real question I encourage you to look at, Kyle, is, back to the question I spoke about just a moment ago. When you're connected to social media, when you're doing anything in this world, are you engaged from the space of the heart? Are you engaged from the space of the mind? So the mind will look at social media in a dualistic way, and it'll say, I'm trying to do good with it, trying to post something on Twitter to enlighten the world. But I encourage you to look at, how do you feel when you're posting? How do you feel when you're arguing? How do you feel when you're speaking the truth? And you'll notice that energetically, when you're speaking the truth, whether it's in person or on social media, there will be a clarity of consciousness there, a clarity of being. And so when you're speaking from the depth of your being, then we're not engaged in addiction. We're engaged in sharing the truth because God is inviting us to share. The truth is inviting us to share. And so this is really a question of discernment. So if we notice ourselves being addicted to media, I encourage you or anyone else to play the fun game of putting your phone down, turning your computer off for a couple of days, maybe a week. I had a friend call me today, and I actually called my wife's phone because I don't answer my phone anymore. I don't leave it on. Said, Greg, your voicemail is completely full. I said, oh yeah, I don't even answer my phone anymore. I barely can respond to texts. I just have so many people trying to get a hold of me. And but to me, it feels really wonderful, not to be ignoring anyone, but it feels wonderful to put the thing down, and just to go out into nature, to be silent, to connect with Zen-like reality. In fact, this weekend, I spent a good chunk of time just staring at a mountain and a huge blue sky. Staring at a mountain and a huge blue sky. And then chasing a 6-year-old little girl around. And so, you notice that the mind becomes agitated. And so the Buddha said, there's like these 5 aggregates, which will basically agitate your consciousness. And you'll notice you could probably find all 5. I wish I could list them, but I can't remember anything anymore. But with the 5 aggregates, you could probably find them all on the internet. You can find them all on social media. There's a harshness there, a coarseness there. And so if you're addicted, you need to unplug. You need to unplug. That's the bottom line. And give yourself some time, some space, and see if you can come back and reconnect with your heart and speak from there. Live from there, act from there. Choose from there to engage on social media. But oftentimes when we're addicted to news, it's because of fear, whether it's fear of what's happening in the world or fear of missing out. Like this afternoon, I looked up in the sky, I saw a big plume of smoke. And so sitting in a state of clarity, I saw a big plume of smoke. I hop on the internet and I start searching to see if there's a fire nearby. And I noticed my consciousness becoming anxious because as I was typing and searching the news sources, I couldn't find anything. And so I took a deep breath and I decided to go hop in the car with the family. We drove to the top of the mountain and then we could see the fire, on the mountain across the way. Saw helicopters flying around it, dropping, big containers of water, and the slurry bomber come in. I said, oh boy, but when I check in at the news and just keep looking around, I become anxious because there's so much negativity, so much heaviness. And then you want to be up to date on everything. And it just kind of feeds itself into this monster. And oftentimes it's the ego trying to protect itself. But I like to live in reality and say, like, what's actually happening? And like my little girl asked me, like, Dad, how far away is the fire? I said, I don't know, maybe 5-10 miles. He said, we'd be okay? Yes, sweetie, we'll be okay. And so I stay with the truth. Sometimes when you watch the news, you invite the hell into your life. The truth is there's a fire, let's say 10 miles from me. And the big windstorm, so the fire is probably growing quickly. Do I need to lose my mind or my consciousness? No. Do I need to stay informed? Sure, sure. I might be evacuated at some point, but in this moment, I'm going to breathe and I'm going to sleep well tonight. And so, good question, Kyle. Okay, here's Richard's question. Okay, there you go. Hi, Richard.
Hey there. Hey there. Good to see you.
Yeah, thanks for walking me through that technology thing.
No problem. No problem. So my question is actually about the Divine Mother today. And so I bought that book by Sri Aurobindo, as well as a number of others that you recommended, the one by Satprem as well. And so listen, I understand you are in the lineage of Sri Aurobindo, David, Hilda Aurobindo. And so you received the teaching of the mother directly in the lineage stream, which I think is important. And so in fact, I don't even know how to form my question because I'm just looking for deeper teachings on the mother. I call her into my body every day, the descending, the ascending. I'm interacting with that force daily. It's a part of my life. So that whatever it is come in. And I could tell I'm hungry to like understand it better and just more. But I hope you can just vibe with where my question is coming from because it's not so coherent intellectually. Yeah, so thank you.
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. And so with any path that you're connecting to deeply, I encourage you to open on the level of human egoic mind. I encourage you to open on the level of enlightened mind, on the level of heart, and on the level of your physical body. The physical body, and to call upon it. And just to call upon it again and again and again. And we call upon it until our literal breath is drinking it in with each breath, where you're breathing in this experience. And so we want it to be deep in ourselves. And to be honest, none of us will be quenched. Our thirst will not be quenched until our literal cells are receiving this with each breath. And after our cells start to receive it, there's this awakening that starts to happen from within us that begins to radiate it. The very thing that we're inviting into us, our cells begin to radiate it. It's only then that our mind shuts up. It's only then that the seeking stops. And so in this experience, the way I'm teaching, that this type of seeking is good. You're surrendering, you're breathing, you're receiving. And of course, it's always, good to look, just in the most humble way. Where am I personally holding myself back? Consciously or unconsciously? Where do I have a shadow, a wound, a confusion? Where do I have I always like to look behind me, a massive blind spot. Where do I have this massive blind spot? What is life trying to show me? And to see that literally, when Aurobindo spoke of the mother, the Divine Mother is literally evolution itself. It's literally evolution itself. And so we want our spirituality to include everything. Everything. If there's any bias in us that says this is spiritual and this is not, we're creating division, we're creating duality. It's this very thing that reinforces violence in the world. And so a great question is where am I being habitual? If we want to be awake, being awake is the opposite of being habitual. Being habitual is basically living in sleep. Living in sleep. And so anything you can do to pull the carpet out from under yourself, to allow it to be pulled out, to let yourself be humbled, humiliated, to fall on your knees, to break down some of these doors is a step in the right direction. And by humiliated, some people may take that the wrong way, but humiliation is a great way to break down walls. And I'm not saying any of us should humiliate ourselves. Life gives you numerous opportunities to be humiliated. It's just life is a confusing experience. And so sometimes being humiliated simply means you look out at life and you just say, I don't understand this. It makes no sense. But I'm willing to surrender my mind and invite this greater mind to flow into me. And in regards to an energetic practice, it sounds like you're probably already doing this, but just maybe for some others, is a good place to check in is, just energetically, is my crown chakra open? That's the first start. If our crown is closed, we basically have cut ourselves off from God and we're not receptive. Is my crown open and is my belly relaxed? Oftentimes, if the crown is open and the belly is relaxed, and we come into the heart and we call upon this grace and just invite this grace to begin to pour down into you. What a lot of people do is their belly is tense and they call from their head and they say it's not working and they don't trust in God, and it's just like, it'd be like me trying to speak Chinese, I'm not going to get anywhere. I'm not going to get anywhere. And so can the crown be open? And even develop the habit of openness. The ego has the habit of being closed. Can we invite the habit of being open? Oftentimes I'll complain to God if I don't feel a descent of grace flowing into me. And that's a good thing to complain about, It's basically you're saying, God, I love you so much more, please. I love you so much more, please. And you're seeing that this grace, it's not just for you, that it's flowing through you into the world. That you and the collective are one and the same. The mistake that many people make, which leads back to that individual spirituality, is I'm waking up. It's me against the world. But if we look at God is waking up in me, as me, through all of us, it becomes a non-personal thing. And I'll dare say this, it becomes more of a saintly thing. Because we're doing this to liberate all beings. All beings. And all beings are being liberated through us, and we're not even doing it. We're just the conduit of what's happening. We're the byproduct, the beneficiary, the recipient, the giver. And more as you let go and these walls begin to dissolve, the non-dual nature of mind really takes root in a beautiful way, where you see that you and life are one and the same. In the highest and the lowest. It's beautiful to see it in the lowest. The lowest. Because then you really know that division is falling away. It's easy to see in the highest, like, oh yeah, me and God are one. But when you can see that you and God are one in the lowest, that you and humanity are one in the lowest, you and animal nature are one in the lowest, boy, do things change. And then we're not arrogant. We're not aloof. We're not divisive. And so I hope that was somewhat helpful. Yeah, good to see you, Richard. Okay, a bunch of questions, and so I better hurry up. Here is a question from Jacob. Hi, Craig. Wondering your thoughts on following our purpose, or as they say, being in alignment with service to others. Should we ignore egoic desires, or is getting them out of the way important to move forward into what really matters in our purpose? Be careful with the egoic desires one. It almost looked like, Jacob, you were looking for permission to get your egoic desires out of the way so you can move forward. Some tantric teachers say that we should just satisfy all of our egoic desires. Like, go to the cake store and eat as much cake as you can. And then you'll feel sick and then you'll move forward from that. But the beautiful thing about the ego is you can have an egoic desire, say like, on a Friday night to cut loose and just really drink. You're feeling all this pressure inside, Friday night comes along and you want to cut loose and, have a bunch of drinks. You wake up Saturday morning, you feel like a bag of rocks. And you say, I'll never drink again, is a funny thing that people say. And then, next Friday night they're drinking again. Because the ego just, it tends to have this amazing ability to hook you back in again. To fabricate a reality that's trying to get you to, get in a little bit of trouble again. The way I like to look at desire is instead of ignoring desire or acting them out, look at what is the truth behind all desire. Aurobindo used to speak about this, that the truth at the heart of every desire is a desire to evolve, the desire for something greater, a greater life, a greater happiness, a greater joy, a greater manifestation of peace, bliss, freedom. And so I encourage you to look at your desires and say, what's true about them? What's the real truth? What's the real truth? It was a hot day here in sunny Colorado, and around 2:30, my little girl was feeling kind of fried, and she started asking for ice cream. My wife got excited, said, yeah, let's all go get ice cream. And what I saw is just people just needed to get out of the house. They needed to mix things up. That was the truth. And so I took them down to the shop and we got a couple scoops of vegan ice cream, and they just experienced some relief from just stepping out of the house. The ice cream wasn't what relieved them. It was just getting in a car and going for a ride and mixing it up. But so many of us, we don't know how to listen to our truth. We don't know that, when we want to drink, we really want peace. Even people want to kill themselves. What they really want is peace. And so it's a great skill to look at what's under the desire. And so this goes back to the question around following your purpose, Jacob. This all has to do with you listening to your heart. Listening to your heart. And oftentimes our heart is the quietest voice, whereas desire is the loudest voice. So if you want to know what your purpose is, listen to the quietest voice within you, and it will steer you in the right direction. Okay, let's see here. Hi, Craig. Intellectually, I know and can sense and stay focused on that quiet, still space of awareness. How do I get to a point where that can be my default consciousness, or at least a place I can easily find and go to? There's this basic teaching in Buddhism is wherever you place your awareness, that very thing grows. And so many people amaze me on the spiritual path. They'll say things to me like, hey, I had a spiritual awakening when I went on a retreat with, so-and-so. But then it faded, it started to fade. And I said, well, I just ask him basic questions like, well, how much meditation do you do? Well, I don't really meditate. Okay, well, if your mind is a habitual thing, it's just going to go back to the status quo. And so one of the things the Buddha taught us how to train the mind on concentration, to focus on the stillness, focus on the space, focus on the peace, focus on freedom. And so I used to just play with a very basic practice, besides meditating for at least an hour a day, for every day for years. But the basic practice would just ask, is peace here now? Is stillness here? Right here, right now. So your mind is trained to, when you walk in a room, to look at objects, look at people, look at shapes, this type of thing, and to label them. One of the things I trained my mind to do is to acknowledge the space and the peace that's eternally here. And so any space I walk into, whether it's Walmart or Home Depot, or I'm staying on top of a mountain, or we'll make it fun here. Like my little girl's kindergarten class, the first thing I notice is how much space is in the kindergarten class. When you train your mind to focus on space, you begin to feel the space within your own self. And so anywhere I go, I notice how much space is here. And then after a while, you don't have to focus on space. It's like you're breathing it in. It's the very fabric of your nature. But when our mind is trained to look for problems, that's literally what a mind is trained to do biologically. And then you visit a great teacher, have an awakening experience, then you come back to life, your mind's going to keep doing what it was trained to do, or what it's bred to do, what it's innate. And so I'm going to invite you to find a different type of innateness, your innate divinity, your innate goodness, your innate spaciousness. And so you just continually return your mind to a question, like, how much space is here? Even as I feel into it, I have to be careful because I get very expansive. And so play with this again and again. Of course, meditation is good. More retreat time is helpful. Yoga is even more helpful. As there's the habit of our conditioned mind, there's also the habit of the body. Most people don't realize, but the body is eternally unconsciously resisting life and guarding and defending itself and positioning itself against life. And one of the things that yoga does, asana yoga, is it breaks down those walls, those habits, that defensiveness. If you ever do a 90-minute yoga practice, you'll notice you'll feel ripped wide open, like all 7 chakra centers are radiating on all cylinders. And it's like, wow, I feel incredible. Some people, they meditate a lot, but they only meditate in this area. They don't meditate throughout the entirety of their being. And so when they stop meditating, their body feels like a bag of rocks, and then they hide out in their thinking consciousness. But when the body is relaxed, it's so much easier to realize the peace and freedom that's here than if your body is tense or traumatized. Okay, I better move along here. Here's a fun one. It's kind of a brutal one, but hi, Craig. I visited a local Buddhist teacher, and he openly ridiculed his students. And later on the retreat, he yelled at me to the point of causing me to have tears. Were any of your teachers like this? Is this even a legit technique, or is someone on a deranged power trip? I'd say almost always they're on a deranged power trip. And just to trust your gut, listen to your heart. You know when someone's being a jerk. Like you'll feel it in your body when someone's being mean. And meanness, if your spiritual teacher, you shouldn't be being mean to your students. Now, I can say this. In the ancient traditions, because they did not understand the ego, they didn't understand developmental psychology, they did not understand the wound and the shadow. There is this idea in Christianity and Buddhism and the yogic traditions that basically like you beat an ego into shape, you whip it into shape, you break it. The same way, I'm going to say something brutal here, that slave masters would beat a slave. The same way a farmer would beat a horse or a donkey to plow the fields. Now, of course, this is not a manifestation of compassion if the teacher is being ridiculing students. So I encourage you just to walk away from this one. I visited one teacher who was like this, and he went on to create a massive like ashram empire, and then his ashram empire collapsed because he was such a jerk. And people figured out who he was, and he got carried away. He got drunk on his own power, and it's unfortunate. But the close teachers I worked with, no, none of them were like this. For some reason, God gifted me with great teachers that I could be in close contact with. And I didn't realize what a gift that was until I started speaking with so many individuals who tell me these horror stories about teachers who get carried away. And, I'd love to be able to pull up a percentage, but I would say, I would just take a guess here that say 20% of so-called enlightened teachers are narcissists. And it's quite possible that they've had an amazing awakening, but their ego wasn't fully cooked, or they hadn't done the work that they needed to do to heal their ego. And so they showed up as a narcissist with how should I say this? So sometimes you can awaken and start to have cities and be able to transmit energy and this and that. And you can still have a little bit of confusion or a lot of confusion in your consciousness. So anyways, I could go on and on about that. But the big thing is when you're with a teacher, and if something feels off, you can question them, ask them about it, which is what this, I think, happened here. And if they start getting, testy with you, they're just communicating to you, hey, I'm scared, I'm insecure, and so I'm going to attack you. That's what most narcissists do. Okay. She goes on to write basically that she's wanting to connect more fully with a physical community. And so this is a great thing. And so when you go to a teacher and you don't find what you're looking for, don't give up on the path. I encourage you to open your heart, to call upon God. Say, Lord, bring me, connect me to my teacher, the teachings, the Sangha, the community. Connect me, Lord. Connect me. If you feel out of sorts and disconnected, say that prayer. And be patient, but demand it of God. Say, hey, don't abandon me here on planet Earth. I need your support. I need your love. I need the Sangha. I need the community. I've done that at times and received, some of my best friends that way. Some of my best friends, God just dropped them into my lap because of that prayer. Okay. Here is a beautiful question from the fellow writes, your Jewish friend, Craig. This is one of my old-time friends here. He writes, hi, Craig, all is well with me. I've had a beautiful apartment and place to live. My mind and my body feel at peace and rested. I have a wonderful, healthy diet and exercise. My career and work are in alignment with my passions, and I'm building some cool things. All right. When I did the healing work this time last year in Colorado, it wasn't with me, by the way, it was with someone else. When I left the healing center, My spine was radiating with a beautiful warm energy, and it would just light up from time to time, and it would feel like a heater on my back. Fast forward, the last 2 weeks, I was doing Kundalini and Tantra exercises to breathe in a beautiful sense of love within me. All of a sudden, I started experiencing horrible chest pain in my heart. I went to the emergency room and got an EKG, which was great. I took blood tests. They came back with no issues. I know it's not anxiety because I know what that feels like. My life feels wonderful, and I'm grateful and blessed. Now the doctors now my doctors are regular MDs with no spiritual background. They just give me Advil and say you'll be fine. I started researching about Kundalini symptoms, and mine seemed to match. I just wanted to ask you, since you know a lot about it, is it possible? If so, how do I fix this massive chest pain? The doctor sees nothing. And he goes on to write, it just seems strange because everything in my life is in alignment from career, relationally, mentally, and physically health perspective. I'm really settling in after a major transformational healing work for the first time in my life. Any thoughts? Yeah, so sometimes healing is smooth and steady, but sometimes healing can be, I'll use this word, somewhat violent. Sometimes awakening is smooth and steady. Sometimes awakening is violent. And the big thing here, Mr. Rosenberg, is you awoken something, whether you consciously did or unconsciously did. You awoken this great force within you. And when you awaken the force of Kundalini, oftentimes it comes in an explosive manner. You can be a great yogi, you can be super flexible, you can be a great meditator, but when the force of God, literally the force of the Big Bang awakens, don't be surprised if you feel a massive explosion in your heart, your belly, your pelvis, your mind. It's par for the course. Now I'm going to encourage you just to breathe, to feel, to relax, and surrender to the process, to trust it. I just had a spider jump on me. To trust the process, and eventually it will sort itself out. And so the great question when we have an energetic awakening, when we have something that's uncontrollable, that's flowing through our body, is, do we trust the intelligence of God? So it sounds like you trust your own intelligence of you knowing where you're at on the path. You've done a lot of healing work, my friend. But now this is a question of, do you trust God? Even though it's painful, even though it's difficult, can you breathe, feel, surrender, and trust what's arising? Can you trust what's arising? And this is difficult because normally the way the mind thinks is, if there's pain, I'm doing something wrong. And most of the time that's true. But in this situation, the pain that's arising is the pain of evolution. One of the teachings that Aurobindo brought was that evolution is painful. He wasn't a teacher who created the division between spirituality and science. He said evolution is spirituality, and evolution is painful. Growth is painful. Think about middle school. That was painful. It's a painful experience being in middle school. High school was painful. But I like to think of Kundalini awakening very much like the birth process. You know, a woman, when she gets pregnant, her body goes through a massive change. Very uncomfortable, very difficult. But if she says it's bad, she's not in the truth. But she looks at her hormones changing and the body stretching and, you know, all the crazy reactions that's happening inside is bad. It's the wrong way of looking at it. She wants to look at it and say, this is good. This is good. The baby is growing. And so in a sense, Mr. Rosenberg, you have the baby of Kundalini that's growing in your heart. And it might cause you some chest pain. You went to the doctor, you got checked out, said there's no problem. So I'm going to invite you to breathe, feel, trust, and to let go. To breathe, to feel, to trust, and let go. And see what comes. See what comes. Okay, so let's see what else is here, if anyone popped up. Hi, Craig. Can you speak about your experience with transmission? Yeah, I could speak about transmission. And I assume you mean about me personally being a transmitter. And so I could speak about transmission in many different ways, but one way is I like to take the mysticism out of transmission and not think of myself as special in any way, but just to acknowledge that every human being, every object is literally transmitting. Literally transmitting. You know, I have these prayer beads right here, and if I feel into them, they're just transmitting peace. You know, I've used these thousands of times. Often I use my beads so much I break them because I wear the string out. So I feel into these beads, they're transmitting peace, and they're transmitting a grounded sense of quietude and silence. Now, right now, I'm actually transmitting on two different computers, and one of them is big and it's relaxed and it's calm. And then I have another computer to my left here, and it sounds like it's ready to blast off to the moon. You know, the fan in it is running so fast, and so it's feeling overwhelmed. When it's feeling overwhelmed, it's transmitting, you know, a subtle sense of anxiety. Human beings are the same thing, same way. When we're at peace, we transmit peace. When we're stressed, we transmit stress. Oftentimes when I walk into a hospital, I feel so much stress, not just from the patients, but from many doctors and nurses. You know, occasionally we'll meet someone like Denny, who's peaceful and relaxed and at ease in a hospital situation. And that provides a sense of comfort to us. Now, I have these two dogs, and you know, one of the dogs, I'll just give you his list of names. His name is Doodles, but we also call him Ding Dong Dirk Derrick Doodler. And just if you listen to the way I say his name, you can see like he just has a huge heart, and he's like a silly little guy. And anyone who sees him just smiles and just laughs with such joy. My other dog, Buster Douglas, he's a teeny little guy, and he radiates cuteness. But sometimes he thinks he's tough and he goes barking after other dogs. And so then he's transmitting fear or bark or aggression. And so as an empathetic being, a sensitive being, which we all are, the more you're in touch with your sensitivity and your empathy, the more you will become aware of what you are transmitting and what you are receiving from the world, what you're transmitting and what you're receiving. And it's important to know what energy is coming out of me, what energy am I receiving. Now, if we go back to, you know, what I was speaking about with Richard, when we open our crown chakra and we become receptive to grace, basically we are saying to God, I know who and what my own human self is. I know what it feels like. I know its limits. And I'm inviting something greater to come into me, to receive. And so we receive this greatness as it flows into us. So as you receive this greatness, you have to be humble to receive that which is greater than you. And a good spiritual teacher, they will be humble. Because when they're humble, they can receive something greater than their ego. And if they're transparent, then whatever they're receiving can radiate out from them. And the more this door is open, you begin to realize that you and God are one and the same. that your heart and God's heart is one heart, that the spaciousness of your mind and the spaciousness of God is the same space. And so more and more as we sit with this question of transmission, of being open, of being receptive, of being empathetic, of being sensitive, we begin to discern, who am I and what my life is about? Am I a human being who's guarding and fighting myself against other human beings? And if so, we're transmitting fear, divisiveness, singularity, individuality. But when you see the fool across the room as your own self, you smile at the fool. You say, oh, there I am. And through the smile, love transmits. Love transmits. When you can see yourself in your dog, love transmits. When you see yourself in the sky, peace and vastness transmits. You see that life is transmitting to you, you are transmitting to it, and then at some point, all the walls start to dissolve. All the walls dissolve. And then the you and the it disappear. And so anyways, that's a beautiful, beautiful question. Okay, I think I did my part here. Let me see. Yeah, there's one more here from Jose. Hi, Craig. Can you talk about how to meet this incredibly difficult social movement where people don't seem to agree on basic truths with peace and love? Yeah, I think the most important thing with what's going on in the planet is, back to what I was saying a moment ago, is to see, that the people on the opposite end of the political spectrum are your brothers and sisters. To see that. To see that everyone on this planet is your brothers and sisters. To look at an individual and can you see their soul? If you're on social media, don't look at their words. Don't look if they have a Trump sticker or a Trump flag or a Biden sticker or flag or whatever. Don't try to sum them up real quick. That's what the mind does. Our survival mind tries to sum people up real quickly. Put them in a box. Say, I like them, I don't like them. But what I'm going to encourage you to do is to see them as your brother and sister and sit down with another individual. See if you can step into their shoes from a place of compassion, from a place of love. The only way our world is going to change with all the division is through us seeing ourselves in the other. See that you're talking to yourself, that you're talking to your brother, your sister, a partner, a friend, another human being, a divine being. To see that you are potentially confused and they might be potentially confused. This beautiful work that Joe Rogan, of all people, is doing is he sits down with people, sometimes on the opposite end of the political spectrum, and he'll have a 2 or 3 hour conversation with them and keep his cool and learn from them. And he's genuinely, like say that word, curious. And so can you be curious about why someone's feeling a certain way? Can you kill them with kindness? Can you listen first before you speak? And we need to do more of this. I used to fight with my mom a bunch about politics, and it got really bad. Then eventually I stepped into her shoes and realized, oh, this is starting to make more sense. Then I came to discover that we're both human and we agree much more than we disagree. We agree much more than we disagree. We all want a world where we experience freedom, peace, love, happiness, joy. And most of us don't want anyone telling us what to do. So if we start off telling the other person they're wrong, we're not sowing the seeds of love. If we start off by listening, then we're transmitting love and patience. And I tell you what, if someone has a hard heart, when we show up with love and patience, that's the very thing they need to help their heart melt. And so anyways, thank you all for showing up. If I missed anyone's questions, please forgive me. Thank you all for your donations and sharing your beautiful hearts with me. Have a wonderful night, and those of you in Australia, good morning. Bye for now.